Survival horror has been around for a long time, and as the years have gone on, I couldn't help but notice a common trend in a lot of modern survival horror games. I am of course talking about the Invincible monster. We've seen this type of enemy in a few games now, but each of them is different, in one way or another. I absolutely love this concept, especially for a survival horror game. It's easy to capture the feelings of fear and anxiety knowing that there's an enemy roaming around that cannot be killed or slowed down. And depending on the game you're playing, their very existence forces you to change your strategy and playstyle. Today I wanted to go over a few examples of this enemy type, and talk about the strengths, the weaknesses, and how this enemy type can be improved upon in the future. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. It's best to start this video off with Alien Isolation, because in my opinion, this game has the best example of the Invincible monster. The Xenomorph in this game is a brutal opponent, and there is a long list of reasons for that. But to put it in the simplest terms, if the alien sees you and you don't have the flamethrower or a Molotov cocktail, you're dead. You can't outrun the alien because he's way faster than you. You also can't hide from the alien because he will eventually find you. And if you're wondering if the vents are perhaps a safe spot, well, you'd be wrong. The Xenomorph is the core of what makes Alien Isolation such an amazing game. I said it in my Resident Evil 2 video that difficulty is a crucial and important part of survival horror, and Alien Isolation is easily one of the hardest survival horror games to come out in the last decade. Evidenced by the fact that if you check the Steam achievements, only 19.7% of people beat this game on any difficulty setting. And yes, I know that even basic achievements will not be obtained by every single player, but still, that is a surprisingly low number. The game having a manual save system most definitely has something to do with that, but to stay on topic, we're going to continue talking about the Xenomorph. In many survival horror games, the sprint button is often a lifesaver. Creating distance between you and whatever is trying to kill you is very important if you want to stay alive. In Alien Isolation, however, the sprint button is the fucking death button. If you sprint for even a second, odds are the alien will be making a beeline for your direct location. And as I said earlier, outrunning the alien is not an option. On harder difficulties, the alien can even hear your motion tracker. And here's another really cool detail that I noticed. If you keep on abusing the flamethrower, the alien will eventually lose its fear of fire and kill you on the spot. If you never played Alien Isolation, you've probably seen an article or watched a video praising this game's AI. Of all the things Alien Isolation does well, its enemy AI is certainly one of the game's strongest and most impressive features. Unless you ask IGN, of course. Seriously, you can't fucking make this shit up! The alien in this game is almost impossible to predict. Sometimes the alien will hop into a vent just to immediately drop back down. Sometimes it will randomly double back when you pop out of your hiding spot. Another thing that should be noted is that when playing through the game, it's very hard to tell whether the area you entered is safe or not. Remember, the space station you're on has a massive ventilation system, which is the Xenomorph's primary method of getting around the station, meaning he can theoretically pop in and out of any level whenever the hell it wants to. Those noises you hear in the ceiling while walking around through a level, that's the Xeno, waiting for you to make a mistake. There are times where I just start a new mission and I'm calmly walking towards my objective just to hear rapid footsteps behind me, and just like that the run is over. This level of unpredictability in a boss or enemy type is truly unprecedented. Alien Isolation has a very strict set of rules if you actually want to complete and enjoy the game. And breaking those rules often lead to immense struggle and angry reviews talking about how unfair and frustrating the game is. And while I can understand some of these complaints, I will continue to stand by my statement that I made in the Resident Evil 2 video. Difficulty in survival horror is not only crucial, it is a borderline necessity. And Alien Isolation checks this box perfectly. While this game's difficulty can be contributed to many things, like the manual save system, the Xenomorph is of course the primary source of this game's challenge. Especially when playing on harder difficulties, the room for error is almost at zero, and I can't help but respect and appreciate Alien Isolation for not pulling its punches. Now, with all that in mind, let's move on to our next survival horror title. I'm gonna try and spend a short amount of time on this one because I already made a video about this game, but if you want the quick summary, the Resident Evil 2 remake is also one of the best survival horror games I've ever played. I played Resident Evil games in years past, but the RE2 remake is the one that hooked me into the franchise. Just like with Alien Isolation, one of my favorite parts about this game is the brutal challenge when playing on hardcore. When playing on this difficulty setting, autosaves are turned off and enemies become way stronger. Beating RE2 on this difficulty setting was a very hard challenge, and many deaths were built up over the course of my 6-hour playthrough. Most of those deaths were at the hands of the Tyrant, or as he's more famously known as, Mr. X. Mr. X in this game shares a lot of similarities to the Xenomorph. First of all, he is completely unkillable until the last boss fight. He can be stunned after dealing enough damage, but he'll get back up after a very short delay. His punches deal massive damage, and just like the alien, he always seems to have a general idea of where you are. Unlike the Xenomorph, however, Mr. X is not faster than the player, and he doesn't one-shot you even on hardcore mode. The Xenomorph in Alien Isolation is a persistent threat throughout the whole game. Mr. X, on the other hand, only shows up for the first half of Resident Evil 2, and even then it takes him a few hours to get officially introduced. A good chunk of RE2 is spent exploring the RPD trying to find items to solve puzzles, and this is where Mr. X is at his absolute best. Solving puzzles in a Resident Evil game is about as standard as it gets, it's just par for the course in these games, and for the first few hours of Resident Evil 2, this practice is not that bad. Even on hardcore mode, the more you play, the better understanding you have of the map and its enemy placement. But once Mr. X gets introduced, everything completely changes. Now simple puzzles are no longer simple, because an indestructible Tyrant is roaming the halls of the RPD. Mr. X, as mentioned earlier, is limited to a power walk, but considering RE2's very restrictive movement controls, it doesn't make him any less intimidating. And because the RPD is laid out like an actual maze, it's very easy to put yourself in a bad spot by making a wrong turn or hitting a dead end. To give a quick summary, the Xenomorph is a constant and persistent threat throughout almost the entirety of Alien Isolation. A threat so dangerous that once you're spotted, the game is basically over. Mr. X, on the other hand, loves to impede your progress by showing up at the most inconvenient times and catching you off guard. They have many differences, but they fill their respective roles to near perfection. Now that I listed off 2 examples of really good Invincible bosses, let's pivot and talk about the next game in line. I personally enjoyed Outlast a lot. It's certainly one of the most popular horror games to come out in recent memory, and overall I did enjoy the game. However, Outlast does have a lot of problems with its bosses. In this game, there are a lot of things trying to kill you, but for the sake of this video, let's focus on Chris Walker, who's arguably the main antagonist of the first Outlast game. Just like the Xeno, Chris Walker is introduced early on, stalking and chasing the player throughout the course of the game. The levels in Outlast are very similar to Alien Isolation, in that in order to beat them, you have to go from one end of the level to the other, and someone or something is wandering the area trying to kill you. Most of the time, it's this guy, Chris Walker. In this game, running and hiding are your only options, but this is where most of the problems with Outlast start to rear its head. Not only are most, if not all the segments with Chris Walker scripted in some regard, but the player can also outrun him. And if that wasn't enough, the player also has infinite stamina, meaning as long as you don't put yourself in a bad spot or don't run into a wall, you are at no threat of dying. Another massive problem in this game are the vents. In this game, vents are completely safe. Even if your pursuer sees you crawl in there, they can't do anything about it. Sure, Mr. X and Nemesis have similar issues with the safe rooms, but safe rooms in those games are, for the most part, kept to a minimum. Vents are everywhere in Outlast, and knowing about the safe haven they provide really waters down the fear factor in this game. Even when playing on harder difficulties, I couldn't help but notice that the hiding and chase segments in Outlast felt significantly watered down after playing Alien Isolation. And sure, it may seem like an unfair comparison considering Alien Isolation is a AAA title while Outlast was made by an indie developer, and sure, on its face, there is a lot of truth to that, but do keep this in mind. This game doesn't have to be a blockbuster AAA title to fix most of the problems it has. I personally think the player should not have unlimited stamina. I think at least some of your pursuers should have been faster than you, and most importantly, something should have been done about the vents because they are way too easy to abuse and exploit. And also keep in mind that most of these problems would persist in this game's sequel. I do think it's a massive problem that drags down the experience of Outlast, but once again, let me be clear, I still enjoyed this game. It certainly had its scary moments, but after playing games like Alien Isolation and Amnesia, Outlast became a lot less scary for me. Amnesia is a game that also has an infinite stamina system, but your speed is reduced if you take damage, and there are no vents that provide complete safety from the monsters chasing you. Overall point is, I think Outlast missed the mark with its gameplay segments, and its long list of problems are only more apparent after playing games like Amnesia and Alien Isolation. And all of this circles back to the topic of the video. The invincible roaming monster enemy is a concept I absolutely love, and over the years we've seen this type of enemy done in a plethora of different ways. Sometimes they serve as relentless pursuers whose mere existence strikes fear into the player, while others specialize in disrupting and impeding progress. As good as these enemy types are, it's apparent that some work better than others, and hopefully in the future we'll see a monster that rivals the Xeno or Mr. X in terms of quality, but as it stands, these two are my personal favorites. If there are any examples that I missed, be sure to let me know. Once again, thanks for watching, guys.